Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Let's introduce our next guest. A lot of you know him already because you will have heard him and seen him on TV and radio in this country before. He's the editor of biasedbbc.org, and for that he gets a medal. biasedbbc.org, do check it out. Terrific website, very interesting website. We're going to talk about these issues and more. Tweet at Richie Allen Show with any comments for him or any questions. Let's welcome to the programme David Vance. David, you're very welcome. How are you?
Hi, Richie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to chat.
No, the opportunity, the honour is ours. Thanks for doing it. A bit busy old day for you today. I mentioned earlier on, mutual friends of ours, John Gaunt, used to speak to John on the radio in Spain some years ago. It's good that there are some, there are still some decent journalists on national and commercial radio here in the UK. So good to know that. Florence on Friday. The UK Prime Minister Theresa May will be in Florence, and it's believed, and this is really annoying, many commentators, many writers who are in favour of the UK leaving the EU, it's been mooted that she might offer, in order to smooth things over, a package maybe numbering £20 billion for the European Union. What do you think about that as a starter?
Yeah, well, as a starter, I mean, she should, if that's what she's going to do, Richie, she should stay in Florence and not bother coming back to the UK, because what she's essentially doing is selling out that which the people of the UK voted for, which is a complete Brexit, and a Brexit without any divorce bill. I don't remember, Richie, when we actually had the referendum, I don't remember the caveat where we were sort of told that if we did vote to Brexit, it meant shoveling billions more to the EU. So Theresa May may well be doing what's being suggested. And if she's going to give, let's call it, a cool 20 billion to the EU to smooth the way, the scale of that, I mean, essentially we give the UK, the EU net around about 11 billion per annum, roughly, net as a net contribution. So that's essentially 2 more years worth of net contributions. That means an extra 20 billion that could go to British worthy causes, to our NHS, to whatever, to British needy people, whatever, Richie. And she wants to hand over our billions to Brussels. Well, I say no. And if she does, she'll pay a price.
Do you believe, because I don't know the answer to this, and we'll come back to that, because there are tweets on the money and the exit and bills and payments and all of that. Do you believe there's anybody genuinely committed, David Davis, whether it's Jacob Rees-Mogg, whoever, do you think there's anybody there genuinely, honestly, wholeheartedly committed to honouring the referendum result and to walking away in toto, completely away from the European Union? Is there any Tory committed to that?
Oh, that's a really good question, Richie. I wish I could say the answer is yes. And I guess probably the closest you come to it is Jacob Rees-Mogg. But then a year ago, I would have said David Davis was also committed to it. And now I've got serious reservations about him as well. So you could actually say the entire conservative political establishment has united around this notion of a transitional semi-Brexit that means that there's always an opportunity to remain. So in actual fact, they're unified around what is, to my mind, a Remain agenda, a Remain narrative. And that's a betrayal of the 52%. And that's the Conservatives. Never mind, as you mentioned in your intro, Richie, the Lib Dems, or indeed even Labour for that matter, who have shown a complete disregard. So it is the issue that I feel that dominates the political narrative at the moment. This schism between the political class at Westminster and the people of the UK, the majority, who said unambiguously, Brexit.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. We see Johnson earlier on in the week. We know the 350 million was contentious because it was disingenuous. Now, I'm as committed to the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland and Italy and Spain and every other country getting rid of this undemocratic, tyrannical cabal once and for all. But it was foolish of Johnson in my opinion, to do what he did. So this is where I get all conspiratorial, David, and you know who you're talking to. So I think, is this some sort of double bluff going on there with Johnson? You know, is this to pave the way for the moderates, those in favour of the transitional period, those in favour of staying within the single market, which, as you well know, means compromising on free movement of people? So is Johnson some sort of buffoon who's playing double agent on behalf of those who don't want us to leave the EU? And that might sound stupid, but you wonder sometimes.
Well, as the old poster used to say, Richie, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right.
And when it comes to our friend Boris's agenda has always been about the same thing, Boris. So, you know, with all due respect to Boris Johnson, I am very sort of non-believing necessarily in what he says. I think he's a bumbler. I think he's a wannabe Churchill who, wouldn't even be fit to shine his shoes. And I think when we look around who Theresa May has sort of set in high office, Richie, you just have to look at, Philip Hammond's still there. We've got Amber Rudd still there. We've got, ardent Remainers, Damien Green. These are the key people around her. And the one thing they all share in common is they are all Remainers. Yeah. So you've got to ask yourself the simple question: why does our Brexit-focused Prime Minister surround herself with Remainers? And I think the answer is because she doesn't want to Brexit no more than I suspect most of her colleagues do. But she's playing a game, and it's going to come and bite her, I think, and it's going to bite her on Friday, because if she gives the concession, I believe there will be mass dissatisfaction amongst just ordinary people, ordinary Conservative voters. And I think there will be consequences for her. So, I don't think we can, I just feel it's going to happen, Richie. I do think she will make some grandiose statement about why, in the interest of good relationships with her EU neighbours, it's important that the UK reaches out the hand of friendship, all 20 billion of it. But to the point, she doesn't have any cash. The UK government has no cash. All it has is our taxes. And I resent the EU getting 1 penny of our taxes. And I think so do most Brits.
Absolutely. Yeah. In recent weeks, we've had we've had guests as diverse as Anne Widdecombe and George Galloway on the programme. Both of them expressed deep concern about the transition period leading to a Brexit that really isn't worth having. It's a Brexit in name only. I'm going to ask you one more conspiratorial question. It'll be the final one now. Yeah, okay. He says, I've been a political journalist for years, so have you, and I couldn't believe the Tory manifesto. I couldn't believe it, David. And maybe because I lean towards conspiracy theories, and I love a good conspiracy theory. That looked like a manifesto. Just to remind our listeners, it was a manifesto that stuck two fingers to the Tory heartland, the base of the Tory heartland, senior citizens, retirees, and people with a few bob, right? It absolutely said to them, we're shafting you. And I thought at the time, that manifesto was designed to bring about the result it brought about. Not necessarily the Tories losing power, but it was a manifesto designed to weaken May's stronghold within the party. And I believe that manifesto was all about Brexit. Again, when I said this on the programme, again, crazy conspiracy theories, Richie, I just thought, David, I swear, I've been around years. I often, in my days in Ireland, spoke with political parties to try and educate them in how to deal best with the media. I've been around parties all my life. I do not believe that a Tory with a brain would have written that manifesto and expected them to win an election on it. What say you?
Well, you're absolutely right. They did stand on the Tories stood on an anti-Tory manifesto, anti-conservative core voters, the elderly, the business community. It was inherently anti-conservative, and the impact that had, Richie, as we saw then in the subsequent weeks, was it brought everything back to the point where they almost lost. Now you're speculating, as to how could that have come about, but the fact is the architects of that manifesto were Theresa May's two best Paracheks, the two key people around her, essentially wrote that manifesto.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Did no one else in the Conservative government have any influence? Was she so powerful? So it's a very strange one. It's very strange, and the point about it is, for me, what it demonstrates is one of the oxymorons of British politics, that the Conservative Party is not conservative. That's your fundamental issue. But it masquerades as a Conservative Party, and when it suits it, it tucks a little bit to the right. But inherently, it's always going to the left, which is what it's done since then. Essentially, she's responded to almost losing by embracing Corbyn. So you could, if you wanted to take your theory to the logical extent, you could say this was a manifesto aimed at driving Britain to the left, by driving Britain towards essentially a derailed Brexit. And if that's the case, it looks to be quite successful, wouldn't you say?
And ironically, nobody in his lengthy parliamentary career has been more staunchly anti the European Union than Corbyn.
Corbyn, yeah, you're right.
I've had his brother on the programme. I've asked his brother about it. I have used the T word. Maybe we get a bit emotional sometimes, but I have accused him of treachery, of betraying his own beliefs. So we'll talk about him in a minute. Let's park Corbyn just for a second. Okay. Biasedbbc.org is the website. David is the editor of that. David Vance is on the line. You know David from television and radio as a political commentator, staunchly pro the UK leaving the European Union, as am I. Not to rerun the referendum debate again, David, but in giving us your own opinions, remind our listeners why it's vital that not only the United Kingdom, but that Ireland and Greece and Spain and Italy and every other country suffering as a result of being a membership of this dictatorship, remind us and them why you believe it's vital we get out of this arrangement.
Well, actually, you framed it in a really interesting way, because essentially the reason for the UK leaving is the same reason Ireland should leave, Spain should leave, Italy should leave. Every country, every nation that wants to be a nation needs to bail, because if they don't bail, they essentially will become little more than Euro serfs, dominated by Merkel's Germany. So if you believe in your nation, and you're a proud Irishman or a proud Spaniard or Italian or whatever, the logical thing to do is to remove yourself from the tyranny that's being imposed on you. So that's the first reason. If you believe that there's value in your nation, then you have to get out. So that's in the one simple reason. Second reason is, if you believe that you should control your destiny as a nation, you can't do that and be in the EU. So we've seen the humiliation of Greece. We've seen what's happened in Spanish and Portuguese. And this has all been to facilitate, I guess, the Merkel agenda, the German hegemony over the EU. The UK, however, was, I think for us in particular, because we have a bit of water between us and the EU, it's even more important, because as the European landmass floods with North African Muslims and changes the face of the European landmass, possibly forever, Richie, it's really important that the UK essentially draws up the drawbridge. We'll decide who comes to our country, not Angela Merkel. We'll decide on our immigration policy. We'll decide on our economics. We'll decide on how we spend our taxes. So for all those reasons, just off the top of my head, that's why I'm so fervently in favour of an outward-looking, progressive United Kingdom. And I really wish we were joined with all the other nations that are being subsumed into this grotesque tyranny, which is the European Union, the successor to the USSR, as far as I'm concerned.
Did you get tired when the debate was being had pre-referendum? Did you get tired of people, falling into the identity politics trap and saying, little Britain or little England or whatever, racism, because you want to protect wages, you want to protect conditions for UK workers, but actually you're just a xenophobe, Did you get tired of that?
I was continually amused by the sheer stupidity of people who would argue that. What's wrong with wanting to make your nation great again? What's wrong with having an outward? The Little Englander one is the best one, Richie, because, of course, all of us who believe in Brexit, we want to see a UK trading across the globe, outward looking way beyond the borders of the EU empire. We want to trade with everybody. So since when does wanting to trade globally make you a Little Englander?
Yeah.
And and also, I mean, the irony is, you mentioned Corbyn earlier and whatnot, but one of the ironies is that surely even the most thick-witted Remainer must understand what happens with wage suppression as a consequence of an unlimited supply of cheap European labour into the UK. So employers have got away with paying piecemeal wages. The carrot pickers of this world, Richie, come from the Eastern European countries. I do not blame them. Good luck to them if they can get here. I blame the government for letting them come here. And therefore, the wages of British people are continually suppressed. And that's why last week we saw the strange news that said unemployment falls to a 42-year low, but wages continue to fall behind. Of course they will, because supply and demand. The EU means an unlimited supply of cheap labour. I want to see that stopped. I want to see British people doing those jobs for a fair wage. That's not being a Little Englander. That's being, to my mind, patriotic. Is that so wrong?
It's common. You're absolutely right, David. It's common sense, and what you'll see in that system is you'll see a massive boost to the economy, but to local economies. And you know, you won't see boarded up businesses on high streets, and you won't see high streets full to the brim with charity shops, which drives me absolutely mad. As somebody who loves high streets, one of my fiance and myself, one of the things we love best in the world is to go to villages and go up high streets and villages where local businesses are on display and not, charity shop after charity shop after charity shop. This is really good stuff. David Vance is on the line. We will talk about Corbyn in a minute. Plenty of tweets on Corbyn, plenty of emails on Corbyn as well, from some Corbyn supporters as well. I wanted to talk, though, because we can't not talk about biasedbbc.org. You're a journalist. What has happened to the media collectively in this country that you've observed in the time you've been doing programs like this, making your programs, writing your articles? What's happened to journalism?
Well, I think we've essentially been given a collective punishment beating by the legacy media. And at the top of that pinnacle is the BBC. And I guess the reason I have for so many years taken the battle to the BBC, Richie, is its dominance up until this point in time anyway has been massive. Its control over broadcast media, over radio, is over setting the news agenda, and it's still very, very strong. And it's that power that the BBC has, which is institutionalized through the mandatory license tax, which costs us 3.5 billion per year, that enables it to keep going. And basically, what I'd like to see is the BBC stand on its own 2 feet. If it's so good, why doesn't it allow people the opportunity to choose to pay for it? Of course it doesn't, because it knows what you and I know, that if people had the choice, they wouldn't watch half of it, and all of a sudden the empire would come crumbling down. Right. So the BBC, to me, Richie, it epitomizes all that's wrong with the legacy media. It's biased to the core. It's profoundly left-wing. It doesn't accept the idea that it likes to talk about diversity, but never diversity of opinion. That's forbidden. So the BBC epitomizes all that's wrong. It needs brought down. And I think what's going to do it, Richie, is a combination of BBC arrogance and also the rise of new media, which the BBC can't control. So I believe it's on borrowed time. And I would love to be one of the guys that puts a stake through its black heart. As simple as that. Yeah, and
I won't argue with any of that. I've dealt with them over the years, and it's disgraceful to see. I mean, I was even my colours were nailed to the mast very early on. Obviously, I was against the UK staying in the European Union. I was happy that the people chose to leave. But even I was horrified by the tone and the conduct of BBC reporters and journalists. I think I've heard you talk about recently, David, these stories that begin with X amount of jobs were created, or the FTSE went up a little bit in spite of Brexit.
Yeah.
You see, they told us that instantly after we voted to leave, it would be economic catastrophe. They didn't say 5 years from now, they said instantly. But you can remind our listeners, all the evidence has been to the contrary.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the thing is that the facts of the matter are that everything the BBC was spinning prior to the vote has been subsequently proved to be a tissue of lies. But that didn't matter, and I did forecast this. The BBC weren't interested in the fact that everything they'd said up until that point was now being proven economically wrong as jobs have been created, etc., etc. The BBC narrative is, and this is what I said to John Gaunt earlier, Richie, the BBC narrative is, Brexit is bad. And that's why, for example, 3 cheers for Nigel Farage for going to the BBC today and essentially saying that he will not pay his TV license next year unless they apologise for the shameful, absolutely shameful slur that they allowed one of the reporters to encourage on his name as a consequence of Brexit when the Polish man in, I think it was North London, was killed. Nothing to do with Brexit, but the BBC sure as heck wanted to make that impression. So I think the BBC narrative will continue. They're remorselessly anti-Brexit. All good news is prefaced with the words "despite" or however you want to phrase it. So and that's the way they're going to continue. There's no sense that there's no way the BBC will change. They have to be essentially taken down, and the best way to do that is to remove the licence tax. But our gutless governments of all persuasions refuse to do that because they are scared of the BBC. They're scared of them, Richie.
They are.
Those of us outside the BBC see them for what they are. I've, like yourself, I've done loads of interviews over all the years in the BBC until they banned me. And essentially, the BBC, it's always a stitch-up job anyway. There's always I tweet the BBC Question Time each week on my timeline on Twitter. I get huge response. But it's always the same. There's about 4 Remainers versus 1 Leaver on their totally balanced panel.
And an audience selected very carefully to be very much pro-EU, pro-Europe, yeah. Tragic.
Yeah, even when the BBC Question Time programme comes from some of the most staunchly Leave constituencies, the BBC remarkably contrive to have an audience which is pro-Remain. So it's fake news broadcaster, Richie. It needs called out. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing on the blog biasbbc.org. The team there, it's replete with day in, day out examples of BBC narrative, fake news. They're anti-Brexit. They're anti everything that's essentially British. So in a way, the irony is the BBC has morphed into the Anti-British Broadcasting Corporation, 2017.
Are we being socially engineered, David? This is something that comes up a lot on this programme. Not with people traditionally identified as conspiracy theorists, but with, we're lucky. I've never been a name dropper, but I know you don't know too much about the programme. But we get senators from the US, and not the, not very partisan senators. I'm thinking of people like Richard Black, who's been on the programme. A lot of journalists and authors come on, and they say that what we've seen with these, wars for profit, these wars that Donald Trump was allegedly against, but we're not going to get into Trump tonight. We might in the future, you and I, get into Trump. But all these things, the result of this, the mass migration into Europe, we're seeing kind of traditional, age-old kind of divide and conquer social engineering. And I suppose Trump, at least when he was campaigning anyway, would say that he agreed with that. He would say that, these unions, these political unions like the European Union, the trade deals like TTIP and all of those, all of these are ultimately about dividing us. Well, the migrant agenda is ultimately about dividing us so that the ever increasing military, political and economic unions, which include those trade deals, can take place. Do you go along with that? Or if you don't, do you understand why people like me believe passionately that that's where we've been heading? What do you think?
Oh, I can accept quite a lot of that because as I say, I think there is this fundamental divergence between many of the peoples of Europe, if you want to look upon it that way, just the peoples, and their political leaders. And when you've got in between them a rancid mainstream legacy media, then you've got all the conditions necessary for what you've just outlined. So it is unfortunate that people are being divided. But then it's also unfortunate, Richie, when we see the willful stupidity of those such as the French who end up voting for more of the same. If you want more if you don't like what you're getting, don't vote for more of it. That's what I would say. So up to the point, I go along with you. I certainly one thing I would say, I stood by candidate Trump, not necessarily President Trump, and you'll understand the difference.
Yeah, of course.
Except, for example, when we had a day like yesterday at the UN, which is always good to get a little bit of truth shown into that moral cesspit. But yeah, I mean, I do take your point. I don't necessarily argue back. But what I think is that if we're going to stand against it, as many of us need to unify as possible, not just on the right, but across the spectrum, if we can find areas of commonality. So, I reach out to every person of goodwill. They don't have to share my particular, let's say, right of liberal narrative. But if we all believe in being freedom-loving citizens who tell the politicians not to do, not the other way around, we have to come together, not fight, not stand apart. That way, as you said in your what you just said, really, they use divide and conquer very effectively on that basis.
And identity politics, which I spoke about with my first guest and we've gotten into many times on the programme as well, has become a huge part of this. People framing their political positions or their views, getting that from the social group with which they identify with, which is very deep, and we could be here all night talking about that. I want to mention just again, David Vance is on the line to us this evening. It's great to have David on. biasthebbbc.org is his website. Check it out and read it. It's packed full of factual information. And when the spin is being vomited out by the BBC and by the Guardian and the Independent, David and his team are presenting the alternative, but the truth behind the spin. If Jeremy Corbyn hadn't been so concerned about his own position as leader of the Labour Party, and if he had stuck to his principles, and if he had said, right, I'm going to practice what I preached for years, I'm going to allow the Labour Parliamentary Party campaign however they feel fit, whatever their hearts tell them to do. I have been the anti-democratic European Union my entire life. I still am. So I would prefer that the UK left the European Union and worked from there, because that's what I've always believed. Could that have been, could that have been some sort of defining moment for Corbyn, and could it have hastened the whole process of the UK getting out of the European Union? Did he miss a massive trick, do you think?
It's a really interesting question, and of course you've got to look at what surrounds Corbyn on the benches at Westminster and the strange mishmash you've got there. I kind of think that you see, I don't really accept this notion of Jeremy Corbyn man of principle. Or if he has principles, I disagree with pretty much all of them. I think that certainly you're right in what you've just said regarding Brexit. He was clearly being hypocritical, and he was being political about it. And it just demonstrates in many regards, Richie, all politicians are the same. You can't trust any of them. But he is clearly someone who doesn't invest in the EU, but in pursuance of power, he's prepared to put up with that. And that makes him a hypocrite. And I don't like hypocrites from any part of the political spectrum. That's why I can admire people who are at least honest about it. And there are people like, Frank Field and well, 6 others, I think, in Labour, who are actually quite, prepared to say, yes, Labour should support Brexit. But that's a tiny minority. The rest of them are, I think, pandering to particular parts of their electorate. And that's why when you put your faith and confidence in politicians, Richie, you always get let down.
You do. And Corbyn, Dennis Skinner did an interview which was on YouTube the other day, and I must find out the name of the young man who did it. I don't want to sound patronising, but I think it was a young man who did it. A young man who's got his own YouTube channel, and he goes out there and interviews people. He did a lovely interview with Skinner, very thoughtful. And Skinner said, look, this is the reason why I went with the government, on the Great Repeal Bill. And Skinner, of course, did the right thing. He said, the fact is, he said, I've always been anti the European Union, number one. But he said also my constituents and very many Labour-held constituencies had a majority where people voted to leave the European Union. It seems what Corbyn has done is he's bought into... Corbyn won 2 leadership elections, and it seemed that a lot of very, very young men and women were mobilised to go out and vote for him. And it's probably fair to speculate. It's probably fair to speculate that a lot of those very young men and women have been, their opinions are coloured by this belief that they're better off in the European Union. And Corbyn is hedging his bets. And if that is the case, and I think it probably is, it's disgraceful. Because your job, first and foremost, is to be honest. And as you said a minute ago, and I'm glad you did say it, whether you agree or disagree with any politician or any man or woman, you admire them when you know that A, they believe what they're saying, and B, they are committed to that, and they don't they don't do 180-degree turns on it. So you mightn't agree with them, but you can admire the courage of their convictions. Corbyn was cowardly and treacherous.
Yeah. But I think actually he was also, to add to that list, stupid, because I think Dennis Skinner is absolutely right. Had Corbyn taken a much more robust pro-Brexit position, those constituencies where there were a significant number of Brexit-orientated Labour voters, they may have even come in even more in his favour, and he might have got a majority. So alienating Brexiteers who basically vote Labour was a foolish mistake that in my opinion he made. And that's where Dennis Skinner, who a guy, again, I have very little in common with Skinner, but I'll completely agree with what you've just said, Richie. He stuck to his principles, and I admire any man or woman who sticks to their principles. Anyone who deviates from their principles for political advantage, to my mind, is a hypocrite and worthy of as much scorn as I can put their way.
Loads of tweets on this. I want to ask you just about where you see all this is going, David, in the few minutes that we have left. Thanks for coming on, by the way. I will give a shout out to your Twitter. You've got plenty of followers on Twitter, but we could all do with a few more. At DVATW, at Delta Victor Alpha Tango Whiskey, at DVATW. Follow David on Twitter. We've had loads of tweets. Dean says, I'm a man of honour, but when you do get to a position of power, your honour disappears with the threat of your family's death. I think that's a bit extreme, Dean. I don't think Corbyn's family was under any pressure. But then again, you never, who am I to say? Fluffles tweets, Corbyn is drunk on power and has been bribed, he suggests. Rich Mortimer tweets, we should have a national BBC boycott. No licence fee, no question about that. Well, a lot of individual people, Rich, don't pay it. I'm not advocating anything. I'm not advising people to do anything that would be wrong, but a lot of people don't pay it. I don't pay it, and I haven't paid it for a long time. I'm happy to say that. I don't use it. And when the enforcement agent came around to the door, I demonstrated that I don't use it. I don't use it. Field Mouse on Twitter says the BBC spent a lot of money in soft power subversion abroad. Sometimes invasion follows. Do you want to jump in there, David, at any stage? Because loads of tweets.
Well, just that last point, which is really good. You only have to travel the world, and that's when you experience BBC World Service. And when you experience BBC World Service, you realise just how subversive the BBC is around the world. It pushes the narrative, Richie, in every part of the world it broadcasts. It's quite appalling to see this misuse of the huge broadcasting power that it has. So, again, I think that the BBC is way beyond salvation. There's no chance of that. Anyone who thinks that is living in cloud cuckoo land. The BBC has to be brought down, and that's done by removing as a mandatory tax the so-called licence fee. Once you take that away, they'd actually have to do what you and I do, Richie. They'd have to earn their own way. And I don't think the lovies in the BBC and all those other champagne socialists that infest that place would be very happy with that.
It's incredible.
with people like me.
It's quite staggering when the salaries were announced. My mate David Icke said to me, and David played professional football for Coventry and Hereford. David said, "Can you imagine? Gary Lineker gets £3 million for doing this." Well, thanks John Motson at Old Trafford there. Over to Alan Shearer and Philip Neville. What happened there, guys? And that's £3 million. I thought there'd be uproar when people saw those salaries. I thought people would think, because most of us, we worry when we get to the end of every month. Is everything covered? Yeah. Are we covered? Yeah. And they're giving $3 million away here, $5 million away there, and look, it always comes across as sour grapes when you criticise broadcasters, but to, I'm going to say it, mediocre broadcasters, millions. Don't get me started. We'll be here all night talking about that.
No, but listen, actually, Richie, you're making a very good point. You just said you thought there would have been more uproar. But the legacy media ensures that there's not. The BBC anticipated what was going to happen, and therefore they introduced the gender pay gap so that the narrative would go off in that direction and not talk about the gross amounts of money paid to Lineker, Chris Evans, and the rest of them. The BBC anticipated the actual problem and the issues that they were facing, and introduced, to my mind, this distractive narrative. So there'll never be an uproar in the BBC because it's incapable of dealing with itself. And that's why it falls to people like you in your show, Richie, and others such as myself in our way. And nowadays, because it's, the reach of your show, the reach of social media, we can get the outrage out there. We don't need to be invited onto the BBC to express our annoyance with the BBC. So, that's kind of where I come from on it. I think it's beyond salvation. It's irredeemable. It must be brought down. It's the enemy of democracy, freedom, liberty, and all the rest of it, in my view, both here in the UK, but also if you travel to Australia, States, wherever the BBC World Service is, it's there undermining Britain every day, 24/7.
Well, you've given me a brilliant headline for the YouTube video of this conversation tomorrow. I've just noted that. No, it's really good, David. It's very serious. Final question. Thanks for staying with me so long. Folks, go to the website and bookmark biasedbbc.org. Final question. Where's this all going to end? You and I spoke off air today about the Irish referenda, plural, because we said no, first time they wouldn't have it. Yeah. These tyrants are not going away, David. Where's this going to end up, in your opinion?
Well, you see, no, I disagree. I'll tell you why. There's a fundamental thing being underestimated, and that is, I believe, the thing that we saw 70 years ago, the bulldog spirit, the British bulldog spirit. The politicians would like to think it's vanished and we're all poodles, but we're not. I believe there's enough of us around. There's still enough in this country to show a backbone and demand that we get our way. And we want it politically, we want it democratically, and we won't be denied. And that's why, despite the fact that I completely agree with you, Richie, the political establishment wants to sell us out. They want to give us a permanent non-Brexit. I know that, fully aware of that. But we will not allow them. We will not be shut up. Despite the legacy media, we've got our new channels, and we will enforce our judgment, democratically in the normal fashion, but we won't be shut up. So how it's going to end is we will Brexit, we will get away from the EU before it goes aflame. And I would only hope that countries like Ireland, like Holland and France and others actually finally grow a pair and stand up. That's what I'd like to see. But the UK has done, we will do, and we will leave.
Folks, go to biasedbbc.org and follow David on Twitter. Thanks for your time, David. I really enjoyed that. It's really important.
Cheers, Richie. My pleasure.
And I look forward to you coming back again.
I look forward to that as well. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and thanks to all your listeners for all the comments and so on and so forth. Appreciate all of that. Thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome. The honour was ours. Thank you. David Vance on the line to us there. It is biasedbbc.org. That's the website. Go and check it out.